Welcome, everyone, to Josh's Severe Weather. I appreciate you joining me on this Thursday. We are getting close to the start of Atlantic hurricane season, and for now, things remain quiet in the Atlantic Basin, but I don't think that is going to be the case for too much longer. We're starting to see some signals in the longer term beyond next weekend for maybe some tropical development here again in the Western Caribbean and perhaps affecting the Gulf states, especially Florida. So we're going to talk about that in this video. I also have a new tropical depression I'm monitoring in the eastern Pacific to the south of the Mexican coast. That does not appear to be a major threat to land, but it is something to watch and will likely become our next tropical storm, and other signals for storms coming beyond that. So just like the last 4 years in the month of June, the tropics have kind of gotten off to an early start. Not a preseason start, but an early enough start to where we need to be concerned. So while we have some time in the next couple of weeks, I truly believe it's a great time for you to just review your plans for tropical systems this season. As we know, last year was very active. This year could be another active season, and we need to be prepared now and not when the storm is bearing down on us. So thank you so much for joining me here, and I will ask you to become a subscriber if you haven't already. But we're going to get right to the forecast here and taking a look first at the satellite image here in the tropics. And you can see that right now things are fairly quiet. The only thing on the map that sticks out is this new tropical depression to the south of the Mexican coastline, and that is moving to the west and will eventually bend northward and probably will become our next tropical storm, with Alvin being the name on the list. Now, across the Atlantic Basin, you can see things are fairly quiet right now. In fact, much of the Gulf and the Western Caribbean are very quiet. And the reason why is we've got a pretty big trough that's digging down through the Western Caribbean, creating some strong wind shear here and bringing drier air down as well. So this is not uncommon for early in the season. We see this often. But right now, things are going to remain very hostile for any kind of storm development. At the same time, over the deep tropics, and I'm going to move myself along here one more, you are able to see here that things are very, very quiet across the tropical main development region of the Atlantic. Usually this area doesn't get going until July or maybe even early August. Every now and then we do get a storm in June, especially the last couple. Beryl was one such example, but right now, high pressure in control. We also have a lot of Saharan dust, which is keeping things at bay as well. So we watched a wave come off of Africa yesterday. That is already quickly succumbing to the dust. Another wave has moved into South America, so you kind of see wave 1 and wave 2 over here, and things being kept at bay. Now, as the moisture from these continues on to the west, we're going to have to wait until things get more conducive for development, and right now that doesn't look to be the case through next week, but beyond that, we may start to see a different tune to what we're looking at here. So that's kind of where we're standing right now. And the reason that I am concerned, I'm always concerned. I mean, being a meteorologist, I've seen so much happen here where storms have formed and within 2 to 3 days they become major hurricanes. But right now you can see the waters here of the Caribbean, and in particular across the Gulf and across the Southwest Atlantic, remain several degrees above average. And in some cases, 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. That's 6-7 degrees Fahrenheit above average here over the Florida Gulf waters, as well as the central Gulf Coast and around the Bahamas as well. So my red is clashing with the red here, but you get the point here. Water temperatures that we're seeing, much like last year in the Gulf and in the Southwest Atlantic and in the Western Caribbean, running above average. Now, the difference this year is that while it's very warm close to land, farther out across the main development region of the tropics, things have cooled significantly. In fact, the anomalies last year were 3, 4, 5 degrees above average. This year, they're running close to average. So what that means to me is that storms are probably going to struggle to intensify when they're east of the islands, but when they get closer to land, they may be set up for a better chance to rapidly intensify. Tough to say when and where, but when the conditions are good enough for that to happen, that is what we're concerned about. And over the last half of the month here, for most of May, not only have waters warmed as you would expect, but they've warmed even faster than typically speaking. In fact, the anomaly has actually gone up by 3 degrees Celsius here, just to the south of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida here, meaning that not only are waters warming up, but they're warming up 3 or 4 degrees more than they should this time of the year, at least if you look at the climatology over the last, say, 30 years or so. At the same time, the Southern Caribbean and the main development region are really not warming up much with respect to average. They're a little above average, but they have kind of slowed their roll, if you want to say that. So, the areas we're going to have to be most concerned with are off the East Coast and the Gulf region as well. I know we're not going to debate about what to call the Gulf. I think moving on, I'm actually going to call it the Gulf of Buckies. I think that way we don't have to get political. We can just respect the big chipmunk there. How's that sound? All right, so moving on. This is the sea surface temperature anomaly in the Gulf over the last 2 to 3 months. And we had a warm spring. We did level off a little bit here late in the month of March. But now that we're approaching summer, you can see that not only are water temperatures warming as they should, they are warming faster than they typically do. And that anomaly has gone up above 1 degree Celsius. So very concerning trends once again here across the Gulf, something we need to be watching. Now, just because the water's warm doesn't mean we're going to have storm after storm after storm. What we need to have are conditions that are favorable for rising motion and for storms to survive. And what I'm showing you here, it's technical. I've brought this up in several of my videos, but this is called the Madden-Julian oscillation. It's about a 2 to 3 month cycle where pulses of rising air cross the equator from west to east. Now, right now, we are currently in an unfavorable Madden-Julian phase, MJO phase. You can kind of see we are actually in phases 4 and 5, which means across at least the Atlantic basin and even parts of the Pacific, things are not going to be favorable for rising air. We've got more wind shear than typical across a neutral phase. But as we move along here into the beginning of June, we do head in the direction of the Western Pacific and then come around into the Western Hemispheric part of the world and Africa. So it's going to take us until we get somewhere in here around June 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th before we see a drop-off in wind shear and more rising motion in the tropics. And when that happens, we do need to be watching for tropical development somewhere around June 10th, plus or minus about 3 or 4 days. So that's what this chart is showing us. And again, it's a forecast. It could certainly shift. But, the certainty is starting to grow a little bit as we get closer to that timeline. It's not high at this point, but it is growing. Here's a look at an official forecast from the Climate Prediction Center. And this is a longer range forecast. So next week, you can see we will likely have a tropical system here near the Mexican coastline. Not just the one we're dealing with now, but maybe one right behind it. We're also going to see wetter than average conditions over the Southern Gulf and the Western Caribbean and Central America. As we go beyond that to June 11th to June 17th, you can see the potential for tropical development does begin to climb, mainly over the Southern Gulf and the Western Caribbean, and things could turn wetter across Cuba, the Bahamas, Jamaica, the Caymans, Central America, in particular Mexico and Central America, and possibly Florida and on up as well. Although this forecast is not yet grabbing onto that, you can kind of see where the trend is going at this time. This is a look at that Madden-Julian oscillation, MJO, again, and you can see right now it's favoring areas over the Indian Ocean. As we move into next weekend, we start to see it head towards the Eastern Pacific. That's what the green indicates here, more rising air. And then as you see beyond that, you can see it's actually going to be quite favorable potentially around the Caribbean and Gulf region here by the June 12th timeframe and remaining that way to about June 17th. So because of the warm water, because of the fact that the wind shear should come down in this phase of the MJO, we are more than likely going to see a storm signal. Now, how it works out is still to be determined, but I'm going to show you all ensembles, then I'll show you a couple of individual models, which I will tell you right now are certainly not set in stone. In fact, anytime you look at a forecast that's 10 days or beyond, it can change. I think we all understand that in the weather business, but I like to look at trends. I'm a meteorologist. I like to look at trends. I like to look at what the models are hinting at. And from there, we can refine our forecast when we get closer to the event. So this is the next 7 days, and you can see it's going to get wetter across the Western Caribbean, especially the Cayman Islands, Cuba, and the Bahamas. But as we move this on in time, you can see that MJO pulse that I talked about is indicating a much wetter pattern right over the Central American part of the North American continent, but also the Western Caribbean, in particular near the Cayman Islands and down along the coast of Guatemala and El Salvador. So these areas typically are wet at times this time of the year. Sometimes it's a dry season, sometimes it's wet, and occasionally it's very wet. And that's what this model is indicating. It's going to be very wet due to the fact that we're probably going to have a Central American gyre that tries to spin up a system on both sides here, one on the Pacific side, one on the Atlantic or Caribbean side. As we move this along, you can see where the moisture is showing up on the ensembles, Eastern Gulf primarily, Yucatan Peninsula, Southern Gulf possibly, and you can also see that things are expected to get wetter here across Florida and maybe the Southeast as well. Not next week, but the week following that. So basically the middle of June could be quite unsettled here. And it's tough to say where a storm may form, but just to give you an idea where the wettest precipitation is, typically it's going to track along or just to the west of that. So somewhere over the central and eastern Gulf would be my first call at this point. Here's a closer look at the European ensemble control. And this kind of confirms what I've just told you. It's going to get very wet in the northwestern Caribbean starting late next week, and in particular next weekend, June 7th, 8th, 9th, that time frame. Beyond that, you can see that moisture gets tugged northward by a trough into Florida, into the southeast. And unfortunately, according to this model, into the southern Appalachians as well, western North Carolina and South Carolina, where we could be in for, even if a storm doesn't form, we could be in for a very wet time frame. And that is concerning, of course, with what happened back with Hurricane Helene. You can see the area that with all the rain here kind of mimics where the heavy rain in Hurricane Helene fell. So again, it is just an ensemble mean. It's just a control run. It can shift, but generally favoring the eastern part of the Gulf and also the Carolinas and the southern Appalachians here. And the timeline for that is going to be starting around June 9th, 10th, or 11th in the southern Gulf, and then affecting Florida into the southeast sometime later in that week. So if you have vacation plans to Florida the second to third week of June, same goes for the southeast coast, maybe even the central Gulf Coast, maybe even Louisiana. This is the timeline we're just going to have to be watching at this point. Here's the GFS ensemble control, and you can see it shows something similar to what the European does, albeit farther to the east. In particular, it's targeting South Florida with the heavier rain, Bahamas as well, and right up the coast of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina as well. I know I don't have the Northeast on here, but you can see if you average everything together, the potential track of a storm would be somewhere up in here. But again, this is still a couple weeks away, and I do expect it's going to change over time. But that's what it's showing for the time being. From weather models here, you can see kind of where the ensembles are taking things. And let me take this back because I already spoiled it for you. But you can see really no development in the Atlantic Basin through June 5th or 6th. There are a few ensemble members that do show something weak, maybe trying to spin up next Friday or Saturday, but not a lot of support for it just yet. But you can see things start to get more favorable over the weekend. And aside from one rogue low pressure in the Gulf, which I wouldn't stress about, you can see there's definitely a little bit more support for some gradual development here around June 7th and 8th. So we're going to look at this for next weekend. It's possible the GFS is a little fast with this. It typically can be. But starting next weekend and probably more the following week is when we've got to keep a closer eye on things. And over time, there's definitely some support. It's not great, but there's some support for some form of a tropical system here. And it's hard to say if it's going to be a depression, a storm, or just a disturbance at this point. I know a couple models are showing hurricane intensity. You know, with the way the waters are, as warm as they are right now, I would never rule out an early season hurricane, but it's not super likely. More than likely a tropical storm at this point. But again, that can certainly still change. So we're going to be watching that for you. I do want to show you some operational models real quick. Since these are already floating around the internet, I might as well just give you my my straight up opinion on it. Obviously, things are going to be pretty quiet here with a front dropping south into early next week. After that, we do see moisture building. This is the AI forecast, but you can see the European AI does indicate some lowering pressures down in the southwestern Caribbean, but nothing organized yet at that point. Now, after that, you can see it does pull that moisture up into Florida. You can kind of see here that it's starting to track something generally up in this direction, right through the Florida Peninsula and through Cuba around the 10th or 11th of June. You can kind of see there's a little bit of an area of low pressure. This model is AI, so it doesn't really resolve an actual tropical system, at least this far out, but it definitely shows something here. So we're going to have to watch it here. Either way, it's could be pretty wet in South Florida, could be pretty wet in the southeast coast, and maybe even the southern Appalachians, depending on how this system eventually evolves. Now, the GFS model has been making its rounds through the internet this week. It always does at this time of the year. But I do want to show you trends. I don't want you to get too carried away with the intensity so much as where things may track, because the GFS takes an idea and runs with it. Right here, you see it's got a pretty strong hurricane south of Mexico next weekend. Will there be a storm down there? Probably. Will it be a Category 3 or 4 hurricane? I think it's way too early to make a call like that. But you can see here, low pressure at some point tries to form here either next weekend or right beyond. The latest GFS takes a weaker tropical storm up through the Miami area and then up the east coast of the Carolinas, where it may have an opportunity to strengthen if it's that far away from land over the Gulf Stream. Again, this is just one model run. I'll show you the model run before, and it's quite a bit different. It does show low pressure, but it goes farther west all the way towards the Gulf Coast of, say, Panama City Beach and Destin as a tropical storm here. This would not be a hurricane at this point, but quite a bit farther west, and the reason why it's got a blocking area of high pressure to the east of Florida and the east coast. But the timeline on it actually is remarkably pretty good. June 7th to 8th for development, June 9th through 11th for potential impact in the southeast. Here's the run behind it here, and you can see this particular run keeps the system buried farther south, brings it over the Yucatan into the southern Gulf, and isn't really a big threat to the U.S. So that obviously doesn't line up with what I showed you with all the other ensembles. So again, just one model run. And the GFS run before that, not really showing development. It's trying to show something east of the Bahamas, but again, that's probably not truly going to be a system to watch too much. And then the run before that takes a very disorganized system through Florida. So if you take an average of all the GFS runs, what you can say with confidence is that we're going to see more rain heading into next weekend in the Caribbean and then the following week across the southeast, and in particular, Florida. Worst case scenario, something does form and takes its time and goes over warm water for a couple of days and has a chance of becoming a substantial system. Best case scenario, we just have a sloppy looking system that gets moving and finally gets pulled away. So again, we've got a lot to watch and a lot of time to watch as well. Now we'll shift gears here. This is Tropical Depression 1, actually looking like a tropical storm now. Alvin is the first name on the list. It's very broad, but it does have a concentrated area of storms in the middle here. This is Acapulco, and this is the Gulf of California, and here's the Baja right there. I think yesterday I accidentally called it the Baja of California. It's just Baja, California. I think I also accidentally said Gulf of Mexico. Who knows? But anyway, we're going to joke about that later. But you can see here that it is showing signs of organization here, and colder cloud tops indicating some strengthening over the next couple of days. Now, the track of this does take it up towards the opening of the Gulf of California and possibly even Cabo San Lucas. The timeline on that, though, isn't going to be until later this weekend. The official Hurricane Center track does intensify this into a tropical storm pretty soon. Probably would be Tropical Storm Alvin. But you can see by the time it gets to the end of the weekend, it's already weakening over cooler waters and more hostile environment. And it goes from what could be a formidable Tropical Storm Alvin to just a tiny little chipmunk by the time it gets up here on Sunday. And you can see here, unlike yesterday when we had some models trying to get this up to hurricane strength, right now it does show intensification. The trend shows this as a moderate tropical storm, maybe a 50, 60 mile per hour storm, but after that it's weakening already and hitting wind shear. And you can see that on the HAVS tropical model as well. The reason why this system weakens is that there's a lot more dry air and then eventually some wind shear from a stronger upper level low that's just west of Baja, California. And so that dry air gets spun into this system. By the time we reach the weekend, it should already be weakening. That moisture does carry up into Mexico. They will get some heavier rains in the mountainous areas of Mexico. But by the time this low pressure approaches any sort of landmass, it is quite a bit weaker and could quite possibly have dissipated at that point. So we're not going to stress too much about it. And life is stressful, but, you know, we're too blessed to be stressed. I'm a Christian man, and I'm not a boastful person, but I do have a big mouth from time to time. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't a Christian forever. I didn't become a Christian until I was 30, and I'm 43 now. But what I will say is what I've learned since becoming a Christian is that it doesn't really matter what other people think. The only person that we have been put on earth to please is God. Now, God gives us commandments of how to live our life, and those of us who have followed Jesus understand that because we've already been given that gift of salvation and the approval of God, but we still have to walk that out. So Paul tells us, the church of Corinth, he says, but let the one who boasts in the Lord. For it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. And that is the word of God for the people of God, 2 Corinthians 10, 17, 18. Don't commend yourself, but commend the Lord. Or what it says is, if you're going to brag about anything, if you're going to share anything, it's not how good you are, it's how good the Lord is and how good he's made you. And that is the news that I wanted to leave you all with today, the good news. We talk about weather, we talk about bad news. There's a lot going on, a lot of people hurting right now, but we still serve a mighty God, and to him I give all the glory. And that's why I end my videos talking about him, because at the end of the day, I'm going to have good forecasts, bad forecasts, but I'm always going to have a good God, and I pray that you do as well. So thank you all for joining me on this wonderful Thursday. We'll see you again soon. God bless.